remember when I was about 8 years old, back in 2006. I was just a girl.
I remember when I was about 11 years old back in 2006. I was just a boy.
I used to wonder what kind of a world we'd be living in 60 years' time.
The grown-ups were talking more and more about the oil running out.
They made it sound really scary.
And at school, we learned about this thing called global warming.
But back then, I didn't know really what they were on about.
I just heard the word transition and immediately a light bulb went off in my head. The power of the transition movement is already in its name.
The great thing about the transition movement is it's so positive, it's doing positive things.
It's a grassroots thing. It's something that you and I can get involved with.
It's very much focused on your own place and ground and where you are, and this is where you need to take care of and build relationships and sort the world out from.
It's about not waiting for anybody else to fix things for us. It's about getting on with things ourselves.
And it is actually addressing the issues that are going to increasingly come to dominate our world, which is namely energy and resource depletion and global warming.
It's not that we're about to run out of oil and gas, but every oil well, every gas well reaches a maximum rate of production and then begins to decline. Whole countries max out and decline. You know, fossil fuels have been an enormous economic boon, but they've created all sorts of problems, including climate change, dependence on foreign sources, oil wars, pollution of water and from fertilizer runoff and petrochemicals, acid rain killing forests, on and on and on. If we can do this one thing, if we can reduce our consumption of fossil fuels and phase them out, we can solve all of those problems at the same time.
Change is caused because we are releasing carbon dioxide into the air.
The sun comes in and warms the Earth's surface. Radiation from the Earth's surface, heat radiation, has to get out in order to balance what comes in. But it's blocked on the way out by what we call greenhouse gases. That's water vapour, carbon dioxide and methane are the most important.
Carbon dioxide is one of the major greenhouse gases.
200 years ago, you see, we began to burn coal and oil and gas. That increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide absorbs this radiation. It's like a blanket over the Earth's surface, keeping it warm. If you increase the thickness of the blanket, it gets warmer.
We don't know it, but the weather is becoming more and more unpredictable, just because we're releasing carbon dioxide into the air.
Peak oil and climate change aren't separate issues, they're the same issue. They're built around our addiction to fossil fuels. If we can kick the habit and get off fossil fuels, we can solve both the problems. Evidence is that if we begin to descend the amount of carbon that we release within 100 months, we can avert catastrophe.
People were very slow to change at first.
No one wanted to think no more cars, planes or apples from the other side of the world.
Imagine that, apples from the other side of the world.
But we all did our bit, and things started to change.
It was amazing, just being part of it.
It started when I was working in Kinsale in Ireland at the Further Education College there, and we started looking around for, there must be places who are using permaculture principles and sustainability thinking and systems thinking to work out how cities and towns and communities are going to get through peak oil successfully. And we couldn't find any, so we just improvised and did a 20-year plan for the town of Kinsale based on the idea that where we got to at the end could be better than where we start from now. So then when I moved to Totnes the following year, it felt really vital to try and do something to deepen that idea and see how far we could take it. And that was what led to the setting up of Transition Town Totnes.
Welcome, Rob. Welcome to you all. He said he was gobsmacked when he saw you all. I'm not, because this is Totnes, isn't it? You can make a difference. And I know that you will.
It's called the transition movement. It's about transitioning out of your current lifestyle to help the local economy and protecting the environment along the way. CBS 4's Molly Hughes looks at this growing trend.
You may be making small steps into transition and not even know it. It can begin with simple changes like switching to energy-efficient light bulbs, recycling more, turning down the thermostat a few degrees, composting, eliminating plastic, using reusable grocery bags, and taking the bus when possible. The transition movement has a place for everyone.
So far in New Zealand, just a handful of towns are taking the idea seriously. We went to one, Raglan in the Waikato. Here's Mihinarangi Forbes.
Welcome to Soulscape, motel accommodation in Raglan. What makes it different is the way it's powered.
This section is off the grid, and we've installed solar hot water systems and stuff. There's a stream on our background where we gravity feed it to just down there, and then we do have to pump it up here for our water supply.
Phil McCabe is changing his whole business into one that doesn't rely entirely on oil.
We don't need to draw from anywhere else to be where we are. life with dramatically lower energy consumption is inevitable.
At a public meeting a year ago, McCabe put forward the idea that Raglan should minimise its oil dependency. It fuelled genuine change. So when will the price of oil get too high for you? And when it does, how will you fill your car, warm your house or put food on your table? Here in Raglan, they're not waiting to find out. They're coming up with their own ideas for renewable energies. This is one of New Zealand's transition towns.
Yeah, it was fantastic. We, 1st of October, we had 400 odd people arrive in the biggest hall we could find in Norwich. We had people working in small groups at that unleashing on particular themes that have now started out as theme groups. So we were very pleased because it drew in a very wide range of people. It drew in people who were involved in existing groups, and it drew in new people. So it did everything we wanted it to do, really.
The structure of this meeting was absolutely amazing because people were centred around, they could immediately share their experiences, share ideas, become involved more proactively. I think it's just a wonderful way of conducting a meeting, and it was very inspiring.
We were talking about how a lot of people our age are really excited about learning to drive and how we don't really want to learn to drive right now because we want to not become reliant on like cars and things.
And it's really nice to interact with the wider community and to talk to the elders and to meet people who have lived in this part of the country for so many years.
So I feel so frustrated and worried and disillusioned with politicians and what's going on and the inaction about what's happening in the world. So it's really heartening for me to be here and see that actually people are prepared to do something. So, and I'm really pleased that I'm in Norwich now.
I thought the turnout tonight was absolutely amazing. I think there were nearly 400 people here, and that's huge. I have to admit, it was a lot more than I was expecting. I was dead impressed with the organisers, and it makes me optimistic that something's really going to happen here.
Part of a transition group called the Northside Transition Toon. And the Northside Transition Toon has started a community hub. People need to be living in community. You don't want you over here and your best friend way over here. You want you here and your best friend here, basically.
The beginning of a dream, really, to turn our local village hall into a zero carbon hall.
It was about 8 months ago that a few of us were in this hall, and the feeling was really different. It was our first public event as a transition group, and it was really like, oh, what are we doing? We're stepping out into this public arena, and we don't know what the response is going to be. We don't know what people's reaction's going to be. And I remember that sense of trepidation, like we're going public. We'd only just had a few meetings in our living room with some friends and neighbours, just feeling our way, and then it was like this first public thing. But we did it.
You can join a transition group, or if there's not one in your area, you can just start one.
Time Meal Awards. This was launched last year as an initiative to promote local food production. So it's around raising awareness of why it is important to source food locally.
We have a local shrimp cocktail, which is shrimp from the harbour here in Kinsale. The Mary Rose is made with eggs from Upton. Basically the limes are from abroad, obviously. Over here then we have a smoked eel salad with beetroot, which is locally grown, and watercress. I mean, it's ridiculous that you can buy garlic in Ireland, but the majority of it would come from China, which I think is, we should become more self-sufficient.
The carrots and the chopped potatoes are inside the chowder. They're grown actually in our proprietor's garden, which is only 2 miles up the road, and he has an acre site where he will grow a lot of our veg for the White House.
And there was a smoked eel, beetroot and watercress salad in there. Size of remembrance. So this is all the work of Pierce O'Sullivan at Toddy's.
Garden Shed project means that people who don't have land and don't have any garden space are matched together with people who have garden space that they don't use in Totnes. And the idea is for it to be a long-term growing community relationship and commitment, really helping us kind of get back more into the habit of sharing our space and sharing our resources and learning that we are utterly interdependent.
So I've moved your leeks that were here. Good. They're there now.
That so few people have access to land. That's a really obvious kind of background thing. I think also people are a bit more aware of the food resilience issues, the fact that, you know, it's common knowledge now that we have between 3 and 5 days worth of food in the supermarkets. I think also food prices have been going up, so people are really interested in growing their own food, and they can really easily grow their own salads. There's no packaging, there's no food miles. I think, you know, people have started thinking more about those kind of issues and eating in season and things. And then there's been this massive kind of media uptake of the project, and the BBC wanting to come and film it, and Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall.
For over a year now, Transition Town's Totnes has been busy matchmaking gardeners and land, and now have around 20 successful pairings.
And if this was extrapolated to a national level, I mean, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of acres of land out there. That, yes. I mean, there's plenty to go round, yes. Really.
It seems a very small beginning, but it will grow. Yeah. And the impact of it and the importance of it, I don't think, can be exaggerated.
It has been amazing to have so much media attention on it, because the idea has spread far and wide, and I must have been contacted by about 20 to 30 different projects from around the country.
I've also been talking to various groups and land experts about how we can get more and more people all across the country doing exactly the same thing.
And now, inspired by the Totnes story, we've come up with the idea of a national network, Landshare.
When I first started it, I thought, well, you know, maybe it will be a success if there's 3 gardeners, you know. And actually looking at it now, there's over 50 families involved. A lot of it is about people wanting those links with the land again, and wanting to kind of learn and be part of that fantastic tradition that is propagating and seed saving and having their hands in the soil, and really kind of, you know, learning what it is that makes us live, that makes us thrive. And it's particularly people who are living in flats who don't have any access to green space. It's absolutely lovely to be able to know that there's a little patch of land where you could just go and sit and be surrounded by your flowers and vegetables and watching the butterflies go by.
Welcome to the store. This is our it's our second day here, and we're having a working bee. We're in Ostend on Waiheke Island, and we have commandeered a garden centre that has been here for a long time. Ubi is an idea that has kind of come to us that we're able to bring more of a capital model and a social model together.
And creating a social enterprise.
Yeah.
So Ubi stores, this is the first Ubi store, and this is, we hope this is the first of very many Ubi stores opening up all around the country and all around the world.
And the whole idea about the Ubi store is that we create a social space where people can come, learn about food growing. We have workshops here, we have demonstration garden beds coming, you'll be able to get seedlings and soil treatments and compost and everything like that. So we're creating a one-stop food grower shop for everyone on the island to get into food growing. And UBI stands for out of our own backyard. So it's a very cool little acronym that says everything that we want to say.
We're planting apple trees, which has a long history in this area. You'll struggle to find a local apple, that's for sure. I know the local deli sells them sometimes. Somebody brings in a basket of apples and they go just like that because people want them. 100 years ago there were over 100 orchards in the area around Llandilo, and now there's probably about 7, so we've got a lot of catching up to do.
The gardens here will now become a part of the curriculum and the outdoor learning environment, teaching the children about sustainability, about their future, and about the community and about involvement of everybody.
It's about getting involved in my community. It's about kind of putting my fear into something more positive. It's a way in, it's below the radar, it's not political, it's a really practical project, it's not a talking shop, it's about getting people to do it. Transition has been really good because it's taking that fear and the need to withdraw and take care of your nearest and dearest and looking at your local community and thinking actually without them we wouldn't survive anyway, so let's get in there and do something with them. And you know, if we all pull together then something really useful might happen and there might be a future that's worth living for our children.
Before the transition, people were just trying to make ends meet. Not change the world, but we had to do something.
People came up with all kinds of ways to make small changes.
Everyone had a part to play, something to give, something to contribute.
We didn't know if it would make a difference, but it didn't stop us trying.
We're not loaded, we're small businesses and struggling, yeah? It's something to help us as well as everyone else, isn't it?
The ultimate test will be when someone gets mugged for Lewis pounds.
And they don't just like chuck them in the gutter.
Can't wait to try and pay for my parking tickets with the Lewis pound.
3, 2, 1, hooray!
Well, the Lewis pound is a local currency, and so the idea is if you think of a community as being like a big leaky bucket and money pours into it from all different places, from grants, from pensions, from wages or whatever, comes into our economy, and then most of it just pours out of the holes in the bucket. Every time you shop in a supermarket, 80% of that money leaves. So you have a national currency which just pours through our communities. Whereas if you have a local currency, this is the Totnes pound, this is the currency that I've been involved in, it can't leave, it bounces off the side of the bucket. So it's never seen as something that's going to completely replace sterling, but it's seen as something that runs alongside it and as a complementary thing. So what it does is it's like mindful money. If you go shopping with a local currency, you make a conscious decision that you're going to support local businesses.
Our initial print run was 10,000 Lewis pounds, and they were sold out within 3 days of the launch. And the reason for that primarily was collectors. So this was the biggest currency launch in the UK in over 100 years. And within a day, Lewis pounds were trading on eBay. Within 2 days, they were selling for 30 quid a pound. You know, it was ridiculous. Because it's not officially money. Okay, it hasn't got the Queen's head on it, and it is not a legal tender. In other words, there's no obligation for anyone to take it in. What it is, but don't tell this to anyone, it's a voucher. The idea behind the Lewis pound is to strengthen the local economy and raise awareness about the importance of local trade and local supply. It helps support our local traders. It keeps them in business when everyone's going to Tesco's. The second thing is to reduce our carbon footprints, because local supplies tend to be sourced more locally, none of the flying around in jets all across the world. We have this silly situation where we end up buying beans from Kenya when we're perfectly able to grow beans here. There's an imbalance in trade between the global markets and the local markets, and we focus far too much on the global markets, which we need for a lot of things. We need them for healthcare, we need them for technology, we need them for industrial manufacture, all of those things. But we don't need them for a lot of other things. And if we just find the right balance between what can be done locally and what needs to be done globally, then I think we've got the basis for a local and global economy that can work together for the benefit of the planet and its people.
Yes, it was a little girl's dress, and all I did was change the top a bit and put a handle on.
We've been to the charity shops and we've brought with us a lot of items of clothing, and we've also bought fabrics from curtains and the kind of fabrics that people have lying around at home. And the aim is to show them the bags that we've made and encourage them to think creatively about what kind of bag they could make out of any of these materials. And it's a privilege to see a child learning a skill from another adult, not its parent. And I think that's all part of developing a sense of community.
That's it, yeah. Now see if you try not to pull it too tight.
One of the things that really impresses me is, as I look around this wonderful crowd of people, is how much communication there is going on. Now I know that obviously making a few bags is not going to significantly change the carbon footprint of Newent. However, for me, there's something about refinding some of the connections that perhaps we used to have in our more local communities. So all ages meeting together, and here we have that, and all ages communicating and responding to each other in ways that often in our very busy lives we don't have time to do. The central part of transition is recreating some of these connections. I think that builds a kind of emotional resilience, which as things change, and we know things are going to change in terms of the materials that we have available, in terms of transport, in terms of oil availability, these stresses and changes that are going to happen, we need to be resourceful in meeting them. And the great strength that we have is our relationships and our communities. And I think this bag workshop again shows how people can come together and be creative, and also, of course, get a tremendous amount of pleasure out of it. There's a lot of laughter as well.
Transition for me has been the thing that has made sense of my whole life.
So I don't know if any of you have noticed some of the...
And I've had that experience reflected by a lot of people, that transition uses every bit of them.
Oh, well then swap, Peter, if you want to.
Yeah, we often ask the groups who come on our training what it is about transition that really attracted them.
It's permaculture with knobs on them.
One of the things that comes across very strongly is how powerful this positive visioning for the future is in drawing people in. And for me, that's one of the most powerful things that any of us can do at this time. Close your eyes and imagine, what would your community look like if you had the future that you really want for your children? What would that look like? What would it feel like? What does it taste and smell like? What are you eating? You know, what do you wear? What do the buildings look like? What are people doing in their days? How do they look when you look into their eyes? Those sort of questions are really powerful, I think, for people to come out of the despair and have a sense that there could be another future. You know, if we don't do that visioning and imagining the world we want and then take steps towards it, we're going to get a world that somebody else wants. So at a personal level, for most people, as they wake up or, you know, come into a realisation that the world's not going to carry on as it is today, you know, initially it's often a very isolated place to be.
Yeah, and it's so hard to like, I'm the crazy person in the room, and I think...
And it's stressful and often painful, and, you know, one of the really important things is to keep connecting with people who see that the change is coming, because it helps support that in you. So that's one of the things that I think transition really provides, is a place for people who see that things are changing to connect with others who want to do something about it, and whose choice on waking up is action, you know, is to find ways of taking action, because just to take action itself brings about a transformation. You know, and it shifts that belief that I think is very pervasive in our world, that there's nothing that I can do as an individual. But actually, if we don't do it as individuals, you know, and even better as individuals who come together as groups, nothing's going to happen.
Welcome to TNS News, Totnes News Station. I'm your lead anchor, Colin Parker, and tonight's top stories. Coldest weather since records began, way back in 1802. We go over to our weather reporter, Donald Carter, for more information.
We definitely wanted the ideas to be coming from them and to be a genuine expression of what they'd learned, what they discovered. As soon as you introduce the idea of the future, a lot of what comes up in kind of collective consciousness in a way is images of hoverboards and aliens, and so it took a little bit of kind of guidance.
Recently there's been rumours that a group of fat middle-aged men have been found inside the castle. They've been using small children, many as young as 8, with plastic forks to be digging for oil that has been found underneath the castle. There's been a very bad amount of oil in this country for the past 20 or so years, has it?
People told stories about their schools, about celebrity culture, all sorts of wonderful, wild ideas.
I see, but what about your clothes? Surely they must be made by machines.
We press them ourselves, with material made from blind nuns in Austria.
To envision something positive, we show the possibility of how it could be different and then find ways of moving towards it. And that feels absolutely essential to what Transition Tales was about the power of storytelling, really.
Stories shape the way that we act. There are probably 3 dominant cultural stories about the future and where we're headed, and one is the sort of business as usual. Everything will tomorrow will basically look like today, but maybe slightly different, maybe bigger and faster and shinier. And the second is apocalypse. You know, we're all doomed, we're all going to hell, and there are many manifestations of that throughout the media, of course. And the third is probably this sort of idea that technology will solve all our problems, and maybe ultimately end up with Star Trek or something, like exploring the universe. And so what we're trying to do is build a fourth vision, a transition vision, which is about a more localised, resilient future in which we avoid the worst of peak oil and climate change, the worst consequences of those, and move into a future where we have lots of people living lower energy lives, but much more satisfying lives, much more fulfilling lives.
that me? That's Jamie Kirk. That was Jamie Kirk.
Well, the reason for making the oil memorial was to try and get people to understand in the school just how much was dependent on oil. The children were going by and I'd say, what's plastic made of? And they'd say, plastic. And I say, yes, no, but what is plastic made? Very few people seem to realize how much oil is involved. Fertilizers, weed killers, medicines, endless lists of things that we take for granted are actually oil dependent.
It just gets a bit tricky after a while. It's getting quite tight. Push it in. If the world didn't have oil, it would be less polluted, but then we won't be able to go on holidays.
We should be using less oil so we can save a bit more than we are at the moment. So
it's just fun getting people involved in making something with a message. It's just to celebrate the incredible achievements that oil has brought for us. Then to turn it into a memorial to say goodbye to it.
We're starting a process today which is very exciting because in a year's time we're working up to having a big trash catchers carnival in Tooting.
We're using recycling as a metaphor to enable people to start to reimagine their relationship with their community, with the planet. We're going to use the material that they bring with them to transform it into something beautiful.
What you're seeing here and seeing now, people who never really thought about the environment, people who not really looked at their own faith and all the faiths in Tooting, look at the scriptures and the teachings of the various prophets. They all talk about loving the earth, about respecting the earth, respecting the environment, and the walk was all about that. And so I suspect that the transition down in Tooting, TTT, will be different from a transition down in Bristol, or even in East London, or even in West London, or even in parts of Wandsworth. And that uniqueness will give it its strength, because you can't impose upon Tooting a transition town model from another part of the country, and that's why it takes time, and that's why you've got to have patience.
It's about awareness, because most of the children do not know about Transition Town Tooting, and today I think it's been wonderful that they were all around to witness this. So I think it's great.
Every event I've been to for Transition Town, every meeting I've been to, is always positive. If you're going to inspire young people, you've got to be positive. If you're going to inspire first generation immigrants, people who English is their first language, you've got to be optimistic. If you're going to gel and integrate people who've lived cheek by jowl for maybe many years, but not necessarily mixed properly, you've got to be optimistic, and Transition Town Tooting is very optimistic.
I've been involved with Transition Penwith down here in West Cornwall for the last 2 or 3 years. We operate a fleet of electric cars and vans which we've been using in different projects. Cornwall's a big tourist destination, so hopefully get people to arrive by more sustainable means, namely the train, and then use an electric vehicle while they're here for part of their transport for their daily excursions. Electric cars are very efficient because for the energy you put into them, most of that energy gets translated into movement. In a normal car, like a petrol car or a diesel car, you lose a lot of the energy as sound, as heat. A modern diesel engine may get to sort of 50% efficiency, so you're losing half the energy that's contained in the fuel. Electric cars can be about 90%. The effective CO2 emissions of the car based on dirty energy, so that's from coal, from gas-fired, etc. This is still only half the emissions of a comparable car. But having said that, there's no point using these cars unless you're going to use green energy, unless you're going to use renewable energy. So while these cars are very efficient, very clean, it's not just a case of let's replace all the cars out there with electric cars and we've solved the problem. It's a case of, okay, let's try to avoid driving solo, try and fill the car up, car share, but then also, kind of think a bit more about what kind of journeys you're making and, try and consolidate all those errands and all those sort of frivolous trips into one journey. What I think is powerful about the transition movement is it's starting to bring together people who have got the right ideas, that have got the vision to do the right thing, if you like. But it is quite a young movement, and so there is a certain lag. Frustratingly, there is a certain lag in making some of these ideas a reality. But what I think is really powerful is that the powers that be, the councils, the government, are starting to appreciate that the transition movement, and more importantly the people within it, because that's what is the most powerful thing, that they're starting to make a lot of sense. And so it's starting to become what was maybe only 18 months ago a very transition idea is starting to be very much more mainstream.
I'm hoping that Rob will inspire the representatives who have come today to hear him speak to take up the mantle of transition towns as a project which all our market towns can adopt in unison with each other.
We're moving from a time where our consumption of fossil fuels, be it oil or gas, is the key factor in our economic success, our sense of well-being, our personal prowess, to a time when our dependency on fossil fuels is our degree of vulnerability. That's the key message, I think, for today.
The whole sense of a town being in transition from what it is today to what it could become tomorrow in terms of resilience is the thing that really captured my imagination and made it exciting for me.
This idea of resilience is really important. So resilience is the ability of a community or an individual or a settlement or a nation to withstand a shock from the outside. How do we design into our towns and settlements and cities the ability to adapt and change quickly and to become much more responsive to what's happening around them? This is the town of... What we've really developed so far is the transition bit, which is the grassroots model, the bottom-up model. So it's fascinating to start really exploring what it looks like when a local authority starts to come the other way. And then really you start to move to what actually local democracy was always intended to be about, where the community's driving things, making decisions, having a vision, driving things forward, and the local authority's role is to facilitate and enable that. Actually, there is the potential in this to create something really quite extraordinary. And there is potential within addressing these issues for an economic, social and cultural renaissance, the likes of which we have never seen. There's something about the transition idea which is really sticky, and it sticks itself onto all kinds of different things. And you see that all over the place, just people get it and they go, oh, I see, oh, okay. This is a process which acts as a catalyst. This isn't a process that comes along with all the answers in a little box and opens up the box and just gets them all out. This is a process that you start and you catalyse and you have no idea where it's going to go or what's going to come out of it. What does a local authority look like whose development plan for the next 20 years is based on the end of the age of cheap oil, on cutting carbon by 9% a year like we actually are going to need to? What does that look like? It's an enormous question, but what's really exciting is today I think we've sowed the seeds of people starting to ask those questions.
A council can sort of endorse something and then
it goes from being alternative and hippie and slightly subversive to actually becoming mainstream. And I think that's our role, is to sort of say, this isn't weird stuff, this is something which makes sense. And actually, if you can change your quality of life and reduce the amount of time you spend travelling and all those things, I think there are so many other benefits, and this needs to be mainstream.
I think what we've decided is, first of all, some policies to embed transition towns into everything that we do, so it's double underlining the idea of transition towns in every action. North Norfolk should not be either flat, flooded or forgotten. And I think today we've put it back on the map, and we're going to make sure that it isn't any of those three.
I think the work that local authorities are doing, the work of the Transition Towns movement, all that work is incredibly important. It's incredibly important in itself because it makes people in local areas change the way they live, change their area for the better. But it is also important because it signs people up and gets them involved in a bigger idea.
We all have to pull closer together and work with each other, because I think there's a lot of isolation. A lot of people are quite isolated and quite scared, and I think, you know, it's the whole war spirit. You know, we'll all pull together and we'll get through this together.
It's an extraordinary time to be alive. It's the most exciting, terrifying time of great opportunity, and I feel that there are doors opening in the world, and that whatever we can imagine individually and as groups, as communities, whatever we dare to imagine, it is really possible now.
And now it's 2066.
I feel really proud to have been part of that.
We turned it around when most people thought we didn't have a chance. Lots of small changes, all coming together, all over the world.
That changed everything.
They're going to switch it all off, and everything stupid will stop, and you'll have to stay where you are. No juice to put in your car, no sound will come from your phone. Your network is wide as the streets you can roam on your own. You'll have to grow your own food, plant up some seeds when your last tins are through, and you'll have to open your door and make friends with people